Hello everybody, this is Ninja LU. I'm just doing back-to-back audio recordings, hoping that I've got enough footage of LEGO Universe on my computer saved somewhere that I can put this all in front of it. It won't take too long, and I'll get a video of me sounding excited for 30 minutes straight. But I've actually got a bottle of water now, because my throat was beginning to hurt after the last video. So, I don't know why I didn't just drink beforehand, but anyway, so this video, is going to be on. I've got a whole list of things here. I can choose any of them. So far, I'm just trying to put off the LU politics video for as long as possible. So I've started at the top, was going to go down, saw the LU politics, and was like, no, I'm going from the bottom upwards. Anyway, not testing. I don't want to do testing. LU server development. So this is. So one of the most common things we get questions about in the community is just, okay, what's going on? What are you doing with the server? Can you add this to the server? Stuff like that. And so, or what are you even trying to do? Why is this project taking so much longer than other projects? Or stuff like that. And so I'm going to try and answer that. All those questions, I'm an amazing multitasker. This is going to fail utterly. Okay. So to begin, how do servers work? Because as a kid, when I first was thinking about multiplayer games, I was just like, oh, well, they just have the players in the right place. I had no idea what was going on. Then I tried. Well, I was like 12 or 13. I tried making a multiplayer game on my school's computers. The way I did it, I realised this is now fully enough identifying information for people who know me in real life to work out who I am, but the odds of them finding this video aren't too high if they don't already know who I am, so it's fine, and I don't think you online can get it from this information. Anyway, that aside, yes, me and a friend made a game, basically using our school's server. So it's an MS Small Basic, which is the best programming language. The best programs are made in Lua and MS Small Basic. Truly beautiful. We tried making a game, basically just storing information in a text document accessible to both computers, and just repeatedly checking that text document as often as possible and moving characters accordingly. And now LU server development, and so that was until I started thinking about LEGO Universe servers. That was about as much as I knew. Now, LEGO Universe servers don't work with a text document shared that's accessible to all people. Now, on one hand, that may seem like a sort of trivial point for me to make, but it's not. And there's one very good reason it's not a very trivial point for me to make. The reason it's not so trivial is because why it can't be. Like, okay, one of the things was it's not particularly efficient for me to write a program that's just a while loop checking a text document. There are probably better ways of me implementing that programming, or trying to use events somehow. I don't know, but there definitely must have been a better way of doing it. And the way in which LEGO Universe, and I'm assuming most games, but I don't know most games as well as I know LEGO Universe do it, is just by sending packets of data back and forth. So rather than keeping a file static and making edits to that file, you send information to update the file. It's that sort of divide. So you don't need to read the file every time, you just need to read the updates to the file. It just makes file reading a lot faster. But the reason why it's not trivial is because of the central point, which is what you need to think about whenever you can basically consider server development, which is the point of security. Now, this may slightly cover my video on modding, which I'm planning on making. I haven't made it yet though, so maybe I'll just make this video really long, because I'm sure you'd all love that. My division, it's not a technical definition, and I break it sometimes, between modding and development is, modding tends to be the client, development tends to be the server. Now, I also server mod, which somewhat breaks that. But in these videos, if I say modding on its own, probably assume, in the technical sense, probably assume I'm talking about the client. So, what as a developer? So the question you've got to ask yourself is, what as a developer do the people at LEGO want you to access? So with my game built around my text document, if I wanted to fly hack, I wouldn't be able to, it was 2D. If I wanted to be able to speed hack, I would just be able to open up the text document in an editor and just change positions. That would have let me, if I'd ever implemented money, I can't remember if I did at any point, or fighting, I could have just gone into the text document, changed my health, gone into the text document, changed my money. Now, so the really important thing you've got to consider is, would the developer want me to access this? And you can answer lots of questions in that way. So, obvious things, health, where's that stored? Server. Can't trust the players with the health, because then they could do loads of stuff. Money, where's that stored? Server, obviously. How does trading work? Server. Most stuff to do with graphics, on the other hand, that's all client side. They don't care if I edit myself to have a shiny shield. There's my video with that. Somewhere. So you can edit stuff like that on the database. That's perfectly fine, that's perfectly allowed, because they don't care. It doesn't make any difference to any other players. You can muck up your client all you want, it's your own fault. Just don't mess with other players' gaming experience. Yeah, okay. You can tell my voice is getting croakier. You can probably also tell the order I make these videos, because I don't know I'll be posting them in the order I make them, just by how much water I'm drinking as I go, or how much my voice begins to sound like this. Yes, so that's the best question to ask, and when I start teaching people about server stuff, that's where I always begin. What server? What is client? Oh, hello, I've got something on my leg. It's not a bug. Okay, yes. So, how the game works, let's start from the very simplest things. We know what a server and a client are. What do we need? What are we missing? So, many people come up to me and say, "Hey, Ninja, I've got this client. Do you want this client? I saved it from the game. This will make development so much better. I hope this will make development so much better. Will it?" And the answer, sadly, is most of the time no. There are exceptions to that rule, such as if you have beta clients or alpha clients. If you have clients from alpha or beta, send them to us, please. They sometimes contain very, very valuable information. But unless you have one like that, it probably doesn't contain a huge amount of use. So yeah, the question is, what goes into it? And well, it's not really the client, because we have the clients. The clients, as I've mentioned, they're client side, so they were distributed to every user. A client is rarely the difficult thing in reconstructing a game. In something like, I'm not going to. Yeah, it's going to an example. So, for instance, Club Penguin. For those of you who've seen Club Penguin rewritten, Club Penguin, most of the stuff, a load of the stuff, not most of it, because again, there's some stuff the developers don't want you touching, but a load of it was client-side. It was on the web browser. Shima, a load of the files were on the web browser. So the challenge is not to create the files. The challenge is to tell those files what to do, and you've got to do that from the server. So that answers the first main question. Do you want my client? Yes, please, but not for the reason you think. We're specifically looking for reconstructing the server, and that's why that's why we've got LUS projects, or LUSP. That's why what that stands for is LEGO Universe Server Projects, and I quite often specify things as being server emulators when I'm saying we're reconstructing a game. The noun I tend to use is project or server emulator project. So hopefully that answers the basic question. What we are trying to do is we're trying to replicate the data sent to the game to tell the game what to do. If you have your client now, you can open it up. If you know where the executable is without opening the patcher, then you can open the executable and you can see Bob directing you to log in. You won't be able to log in. You need the game to do that. how we did this initially, this is back in the very, very early days, was we just recorded what the server sent us. This was, I say we, this was one user, PW Jones, bless his soul, because without him, I don't know any of this would ever have happened. Whilst the game was live, he used Wireshark. It's a program for storing, for recording and storing network traffic data. He used Wireshark to store everything going through his computer, and so he captured stuff like logging in, and they basically searched through the packets, found what decrypted packets, found which packets to send, sent the packets. If you go onto Looney at the moment, there's a packets folder. If you go, so you go into the directory, I think it's under debug, there'll be a folder saying packets somewhere there. I was looking at it the other day for the Happy Flower version of the alpha server. But I say alpha server, Looney, but so that it lets you get onto the server and sends the HF game message. I think it's a game message. I don't actually know how it works. Maybe it is just Looney, but with the changed token to basically. So that's another example of what you want to be on the server and what you want to be on the client. If I've got an old client, that potentially means glitches, and maybe those glitches could benefit the player. So one of the things the server is in charge of doing is verifying that everyone who comes on has a client with the correct version ID. That happens when you try and log on, because technically version IDs could mess up with what's going on with the character loading or something, so you don't want that to happen. And then when you actually try and load worlds, it takes a hash of your world files and checks that hash. I believe that occurs both server and client side. I might be wrong on that count. It may just be client side, because they assume, well, hashes are a notoriously difficult thing to fake. Well, okay, they're not impossible to fake. See the fact that the MD5 hash was cracked, but they are pretty difficult to fake. And at the time, no one was assuming that LEGO Universe hashes would be cracked. Or that any hashes would be cracked for that matter. So yes, we've got our client, we've got our server. So how does one recode a server? Well, I'm beginning to get out of my depth here. So basically, you've got RackNet, or in the case of LCDRU, he reprogrammed RackNet entirely. So RackNet being the basically server system that has all the elements about how you directly communicate with the particular games and security stuff like that. In LCDR's case, he reprogrammed RackNet entirely in Python so that he could insert it into his server. For most of the C-based projects, they just use a version of RackNet, I believe, in Visual Studio. I don't know if LCDR works in Visual Studio, but yes. So as a server programmer, your job is basically to tell RackNet to interpret the information RackNet gets, and to, based on your interpretation of the information RackNet gets from the clients, you then decide what information you want to send back. The clients, to the clients, the server's word is final. Which it has to be, because you don't really want, if the client could override what the server sent, then the client can just be like, I want money, server, no, client, haha, I've got money. I mean, you technically can do that, but you can't do it in any useful way. If you wanted to do that, it would be not impossible. You'd have to somehow trick the server, because speaking of things, you wouldn't even be able to send the I've just picked up some dropped coins event from the client, because the server keeps track of all the dropped coins. The server knows exactly where all the coins are, and it's like, no, you didn't. You weren't standing there when the coins were there. You didn't get any. So that's the major divide. Almost always, the major divide between is something server or is something client is down to security. Let's actually, we can go into yeah, can we go into a bit of history on this? No, let's go into a bit of the workings. So basically, as I mentioned there, the server needs to be able to know at any particular instance in time, did a player get a coin, and stuff like that. Needs to be able to know where is the player with respect to the enemy, where is the enemy with respect to the player, where are all the enemies. The client has to trust the server for that. Because, again, if you as the client could control where enemies were, that would be a pretty big weakness. The server also determines what is an enemy. The server will send information to the client, basically saying this is an enemy. They've got if you look into the game database, there is a value called the faction ID, which it doesn't relate to in-game factions. It stumped me so much. Mostly because it sort of obviously doesn't relate to in-game factions, because it includes numbers up to like 777. 777 is just the one I remember. It's the Thwok. I think it's 77. It might be 77. It might be 666. I can't remember. Probably not 666 because I bet the LU devs were superstitious. So probably 777. But yeah, so. But it is possible to, technically, it's possible to override that. So you, as the user on your computer, you can edit the database so that enemy says friend and friend says enemy, and vice versa. Which means technically you can attack your friends. However, this is where the server comes in, because we don't want this to happen. But so why is it stored on your computer anywhere? What's a friend and what's an enemy if we can't trust you? Well, the reason voice break. The reason it's stored somewhere on the computer is because you do need to know. So all your movement input is set, that's something the client handles. The client handles what movement input is sent. The server is just in charge of do we trust it. It's in the same way the server doesn't handle any of the images you see on screen. It could do, I'm sure, but it's not worth pixel by pixel rendering an image and sending it out to everyone at once. In theory, everything pretty much on any game everything could be done by the server, but it doesn't make much sense when you could distribute certain functions to all the clients and reduce computational time. So what actually happens if you try and attack your friend? Well, basically, you can trick the game into maybe thinking that friends are enemies and enemies are friends, and what that does is that lets you aim an attack at something. It's that sort of idea that I press Alt and my character lunges for a particular person. However, it doesn't actually deal damage. Your client may think it's dealt damage, and it will actually, I'm pretty certain it comes up saying it's dealt damage. For those of you, so to try and explain what I mean, people may have seen, I think, earlier versions of Jailus where they haven't properly got, possibly even the current version, I don't know how well it works in the current version off the top of my head, item spawning and despawning to work yet. I can't remember if the current version they work with this glitch and just drop coins to make it seem as though it works. I can't remember how hacky it is. But basically, if you were to attack and kill something, it would look as though you've attacked it, and then you'd send a message to the server saying, haha, I attacked it, I've killed it, and the server just wouldn't send anything back because JList didn't have that added yet. And so eventually the client would realise, oh, maybe I did done a bad. And basically the character just reappears. I think that's why it's going on anyway. And so, worst that would happen, you'd attack another player. The client would be like, the server rather would be like, why are you doing that? That's not an enemy. Stop that, please. And may ban you on the spot because the only way of doing that would be editing the database, and if you know enough to edit the database like that, presumably you're doing so with malicious intent, or to basically just ignore it. In other words, you won't be able to deal damage to your friends. So this also gives us some sort of an idea of what goes in to the development. If you look at, now would be a really great time for me to have images, but that would require editing skill, and I don't. So if you go through the code of Jailus, there's a big thing called gamemessages.cpp. You notice I use Trailers a lot as an example. That's because I technically do still develop it. It's just I'm not publishing the developments because they're not good. I'm just doing it. I'm modding the server for my own fun and enjoyment, or frustration, as the case may actually be most of the time. Yes, you can look at gamemessages.cpp, and you can, in case you didn't notice, there was a nice jump cut there. You can go into gamemessages.cpp, and you can look through, and you can see, basically, the server gets a load of messages from RackNet. Some messages RackNet handles, some messages it doesn't. Some messages are just where things are, and the devs have something called a replica manager, which basically takes care. Well, I say takes care. I'm pretty certain it's a combination of what they do and what RackNet does. Actually, I think. So when something moves, you serialize that thing to have moved to the new place, and you store that information. And so, yeah, potentially. It's a potentially useful modding tool if you're modding a server. Just throwing it out there. So you can watch, and the code basically, when you get a game message, we've learnt game messages have a certain format. There are certain packets that aren't game messages, which we still have to deal with, but loads of the things come in the form of, so like authentication, I'm pretty certain isn't a game message off the top of my head. I really should look at the docs or script these things before making the videos. Not that when I scripted the first one it went so well. So yeah, you can look through and you can see all the it checks different IDs for different game messages, and if you go on the documentation, you'll find we know about a lot of them. There are certain ones we don't know about. We don't know what they do. There are certain ones we think we might know what they do, but we're not certain. And yeah, so that's a huge part of what goes into development. It's not as simple as just programming a game, because there's a huge amount of research. If we've got so there are two perfect examples of that. There's the FDB database format. This database format, there is no evidence we have found anywhere of it existing anywhere else. The developers have theorized that it might be fast database format or fun database format. Hey, I hear YouTubers doing this. Post below in the comment section what you think FDB might stand for. Yes, and it doesn't don't Google what does FDB stand for, because the one that comes up is not, it is a database type, but it's not the same format. I have checked. And so yes, we've got one brilliant example of what development is and why research is such an important part of development, in the fact that we didn't know as programmers and developers. I don't know why I'm using we here. They didn't know. It's not like I'm doing anything. I meant we as a community, but anyway. The community did note my subtle change of noun there. The community didn't know what information the server had. Technically, there was a document in earlier versions of the client. This is why different client versions are quite useful, called evantest.xml, which contains loads of database information. But I'm pretty certain not all of the information on that data. I'm almost 100% certain that not all of the information on that database is in our game database, and vice versa. So it wasn't 100% reliable. And so for getting stuff like IDs, there was a bit of difficulty in that. So one of the things the developers had to do is work out how to decode the FDB database format. And you pretty much got to look at it with a hex editor. Now, in order to mod stuff, I've studied the database format quite a lot, and tried to go through and understand it, and I can just about understand how it works now. Like, I get everything, I can read through it, know how to do it, know how the game treats stuff, I can make edits, it's all fine. But that was with documentation. I am astounded at the fact that people were able to recognise, just from looking back, I can see how they would have done it, but I never would have thought to have done that. It's very difficult. I would imagine, because I've never tried to do it from scratch, and now I can try and do it from scratch. But I am very impressed with the fact that they managed to decode this entire database format and export this database. That's one good example of research, and why it's not just programming ability that comes into this, but it's the ability, basically cryptography, basically to look at a document and say, this thing here looks like it's a pointer to a reference somewhere within the document, this looks like it's this value stored, etc. etc, etc. I want to get to the end of this video without taking another sip of water, but it's going to be a close run thing. Then the other example of where development comes in is packets. Now, there are two ways it can actually come in here. Firstly, we've got all of PW Jones's packets, which he stored from the game, and we've got examples of the game doing lots of things. And we can send those packages back to the game, we can work out what it's doing, and we can then maybe work out, well, okay, we know this is where the packet ID should come. There's this stuff after the packet ID, which comes before the next packet. What does this do? And then maybe test out values there. And so we can slowly begin to build up an idea of what each particular packet does. Then there's the other hand, stuff like Happy Flower, which I have no idea how LCDR managed to, or LCDR and I want to say it was Matthew, I might be wrong, I think it was LCDR and Matthew. LCDR basically got Happy Flower working, then Matthew working with, or got it working, but didn't have any clients which had enough of Happy Flower on it. Matthew worked with him to get a version of Happy Flower up and running, and I think Darwin made the edited version of Uni that we now use today for it. But yes, that's an example of research where we didn't have the packets. I'm pretty certain, like, there is no reason, I don't know that for a fact, there is no reason PW Jones would have a packet from the server saying, hey, PW Jones, can you please run Happy Flower? Can you do that? Because there's no reason for a normal user to have Happy Flower. There is so much of no reason for a normal user to run Happy Flower that Happy Flower no longer exists in the game code. That's why LCDR basically sat on Happy Flower for so long, not knowing that anyone could use it, because he didn't have the Happy Flower code in the machine. Yeah, so that's one example. There was another example I was going to go into. Don't know what it is. Help me. Oh yes, and then there is the it's the version of the somebody else's code effect. So I may have worked out that a certain game message corresponds to the shooter. I'm taking an example I saw Simon looking at in the development chat ages ago. I'm taking the example of a shooting gallery thing, and my theory is that this corresponds to firing a cannonball at a certain position, certain direction. Yeah. And to clarify, this is where I stopped talking about Simon's experience. This is where I stopped talking about my own experience on Roblox, which is, you've got, the game is a big, complicated thing. And even if you, in theory, know what all the packets do, that's not the same as actually making them do the thing. Working on somebody else's code, I always liken to being a little bit like biology or chemistry compared to physics. This is a physicist talking, so maybe this doesn't surprise you to make this analogy. But in the fact that we don't understand precisely what's going on, especially biology, especially in medicines, there is a certain amount we can do. We can build very complicated drug models, and there's some amazing pharmacology, chemistry, computational chemistry going on there, but we don't know exactly how any of it is working. And I've read papers where people have been like, oh yeah, we don't know how this reaction actually works. We think this thing might be orbiting this other thing. We don't really know what's going on here. And yeah, there's just chemical reactions which we don't understand properly yet. And so in the same way, we don't truly understand everything that's going on with the game. Some people have taken to using a Gehedra, don't know how it's pronounced, a program which basically decompiled, I think it was by the NSA possibly. I can't tell if that's a meme and that I just bought a meme. But anyway, this decompilation program, which basically takes a binary and turns it into a binary file, like an executable, and turns it into C++ code. And so now sometimes people can look at it and sort of work out okay, the game receives this packet, what does it do? But again, this is outstanding research. You are taking an executable file. Executable files are a huge amount of code. If you imagine typing code onto a computer screen, like an if statement on a computer screen is the stuff that goes into that may just be a few bytes of executable code. I shouldn't have picked if, because if's a very small thing, but a very small set of letters. But basically, it's hugely complicated, and there are basically two ways of working out what a packet's going to do. One is to try loads of different variations on a packet, and this is to clarify what a packet's going to do once we already know what all the values mean. It's still not clear cut because it's someone else's code and you don't know precisely how they're treating the values, because they would have been using a sort of standard. You don't know what they've assumed about the packets to go into the calculations that are going into the game. Maybe they'll have assumed, I don't know, that rather than being so that direction vectors, rather than being unit vectors, pointing somewhere with the magnitude of 1, maybe they've decided that the x component is always going to be normalized. Why you do that, I don't know, but it's an example. That would be really bad if something was pointing perpendicular to the x direction, but you get my point. We don't know, I hope. I can't really say that definitively. We don't really know precisely how all the code works, and so your option is to either just try different variations, see if you can work out what's going on, what the server is doing. I just passed pi 3141 on the time this has been going for. I should wrap this up soon. We don't know, but I want to get to this point because how amazing this is. We don't necessarily know. So your only two options are to try loads of different things, try and get inside the head of a developer, something like that, or to literally follow through basically the C++ equivalent of binary data, a huge file on your computer, and try and follow through what logic the game is undergoing. It is truly amazing what developers have to do. And now, bear in mind, this is the comeback to anyone who ever says this game finished first. This game has already done it. You people are doing nothing. And there have been people who have said that in very colourful language. I really need a drink now. The people who said that in extremely colourful language on the LEGO Universe Community Hub. And the comeback to them is, I don't know enough about your project to answer. But these are the comeback to them is to challenge them to do it. These are developers who are doing this for free. They're not a huge community of developers. LEGO Universe is the worst game to try and remake because it was targeted at kids. Kids are not the people who are going to be most likely to understand how to reconstruct it. Like, that's one of the reasons I'm so astounded we've got as far as we are, because we are the worst community to basically tell a load of people who have just, tell a load of 10-year-old kids who have just lost their favourite game, okay, now decrypt the packets, which this guy, why did he do it? I don't know, but he did it. Decrypt those packets, now send those packets back to the computer, start editing those packets, work out how to send them back to the computer, try and do all this stuff. It's outstanding we're here. And this is all in the developer's own time. So, yes, maybe other games have finished faster. Maybe, although it is heresy to say it, maybe there are some better developers out there. But I don't think so. I truly think we have got the most... Sorry, no, I mean developers on other games. There may be amazing LEGO Universe developers we don't have yet. I hope there are. But I think we are truly lucky to have a community of developers who can do this. Because not only are we the worst group of people or the worst game target market to try and do this, but this is also people doing it for free. We can't get paid money to do any of this. I'm saying we. I don't know why I'm saying we. They don't get paid any money. They are not legally allowed to get paid any money. If they were to be paid money, the best case scenario is that they get a cease and desist. Money is out of the question for them. They are doing this completely for free. And all the while with the knowledge that someone could be stupid and LEGO's tolerance of us could just shut us all down. It is outstanding to me that we're as far along as we are. And I hope this is from someone who's barely a developer. So I'm not the best person to talk about this. I hope this explains something. If someone else comes out with a video that better explains the development process, which wouldn't be difficult, so one of the developers, please do it. I will not take this video down, but I will, like, I don't know, set up a redirect or something. Big thing that comes across the screen saying, don't watch this video, go to this video. So, yeah. Development is... I hope this explains a little bit more about development, and I just explained why it is really, really difficult. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Sorry, that was the worst ending ever. Thank you for listening. Remember to, if you're new to the channel, to like and subscribe and hit the bell button of the other developers' videos. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Ninja So long. I am having a drink.